All right, welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is Elliot and you're watching Rickety Ski Reviews. Today, we're gonna talk about something a little bit different. We're gonna talk about how to stay warm. Now, I grew up in rural Vermont where it's really cold. So over the years, I've developed tactics on how to stay warm, how to keep my core body temperature warm, all of that. So let's just jump right into it. Now there's a few basics that you need to know about keeping warm. Number one is keeping your core body temperature warm. That is the most critical piece. Keeping that center of mass warm so that that warm blood can kind of circulate through the rest of your body. And then the second is keeping your appendages warm. The parts that don't get the most blood flow can sometimes be really susceptible, especially to frostbite. Frostbite is nasty stuff. You can do nerve damage on your fingers and toes. It's no joke. Keep your hands warm, keep your core warm. And then the third thing is keep yourself dry. There is nothing that pulls heat away from your body quicker than being wet. And especially if you have the wrong kind of clothes, it's not only getting wet, but you will stay wet if you have the wrong kind of material on. So let's start first with base layers. Now the number one thing to prioritize with base layers is making sure you don't have any cotton on you. That means no cotton socks, cotton t-shirts, cotton underwear. So what I prioritize for my base layers is wool. Or if it's not that warm, I will also go with kind of a synthetic, making sure you don't get too hot, because once you start sweating and then you go in that cold chair, that sweat will evaporate and you will lose a lot of temperature on your base. So it's always finding that happy medium. If I am in the most extreme conditions, I absolutely want wool anywhere I can get it. But if it's kind of in the middle where you're in the trees and you're sweating, you don't want that, because then you will be cold once you get out of the trees and you're not moving as much, especially on those cold trail rides. So the first thing I do is just make sure that I've got the right base layer, whether it's synthetic. You know, right now I've got my kind of base layer that's synthetic here. I believe it's polyester, but I could be wrong. But if it's really cold, what I prioritize is a wool top. So this wool top I have is from Patagonia. It's got the fingers to kind of keep everything in line so that I don't get any gaps with my gloves. And then I've got these buttons here that is gonna allow me some flexibility in, you know, how warm I wanna be. Wool on the skin is not only going to still keep you warm if it gets wet, but also it is just really warm as a base layer. So wool is king. There's an old saying in Vermont and New Hampshire that goes, cotton kills. And that's because cotton, when it gets wet, stays wet and stays cold. And that cold garment will constantly be sapping heat from your body. So that's why I go with wool when I really wanna be warm, because not only will it still keep me warm when it's wet, it will do a good job not hanging on to that moisture. The next thing from here I'll go with is a fleece that is a mix of wool and polyester. So kind of a healthy mix. The way that you want your fleece to fit is you don't want it to be too big. I've got some bigger fleeces back there. If you've got a base layer fleece, you want this to be really tight to your body so that you're able to pack other layers on it and kind of keep that heat close to your body. If things get too loose, then you can have airflow through there, and that's gonna kind of prevent you from having good insulation. But yeah, just a nice quarter zip fleece, and this will keep your base warm. As I've said in previous videos, I always keep another extra fleece in the car just so I can kind of stay warm and dry, but this is what I would use for a base layer fleece on a cold day. The other thing worth mentioning is that it's important to pack these layers so you have that flexibility to lose a layer. Like I said before, if you start sweating, well, that sweat is gonna get cold and then it's going to sap that heat away from you. So having layers allows you flexibility to adapt to each situation. And on top of that, just having layers keeps your body warm, but it's a smart way to kind of have your clothes set up in really cold environments. Now, specifically Vermont, you want stuff that has a high collar, because anywhere that moist air can get in will be cold on your skin. Seriously. The West Coast, it's not so big as long as you can kind of keep the wind off, but back home, man, any crack or crevice that cold air can find its way in, it will. So having that stuff, even if you don't like kind of that turtlenecky look, this will keep you warm. Got my wool necky on a really cold day, specifically smart wool. I love smart wool stuff. What you can do if you want to be a real pro is put the necky on first and then put the base layers over. That way there's no gap. But yeah, a nice warm necky is really gonna keep cold air from kind of getting to your core. It also keeps the wind and elements off of your face, which is important, right? Your nose is still kind of an appendage that you can get frostbite on. A lot of times you'll see frostbite on the nose and the cheeks. You want to kind of keep those things protected. The next thing I'm going to go for will be my jacket. Now, different conditions call for different jackets. If it's just cold, like it's biting cold, but it doesn't have a lot of moisture or a lot of humidity or any kind of wind element, it's just like stale air cold, then I'm gonna go with my down jacket. Down, similar to wool, will keep you warm, But what's nice about down is that it's got this loft to it that basically insulates these pockets of air around you. It's the reason that Canadian geese stay warm. I'm gonna give you a simplified version, but basically the higher the loft, the warmer it's able to be. It's also kind of the more poofy it is, the larger the pockets of air it's able to kind of trap. But the way that they rate it is based on loft. It's basically how much it expands after being pressed down. It gets complicated, but just know that you're looking for high loft. This jacket specifically saved me one night. I decided for some reason I was gonna go snow camping with the wrong equipment. I had this jacket and it kept my body warm enough to get through the night. That's a story for another time, but these jackets are no joke. The other thing you could do if you want to be really warm, you could have a second fleece, just another layer to kind of keep you insulated. In this case, I'm not going to show you that, but just know you can stack fleeces and have all of that. It looks silly, but God, where I come from, it's not uncommon to see people have 2 layers of fleece like this. So see, you can even kind of hear this jacket. It's got high loft, big volume. Over the years, it's packed down. Down jackets don't last forever. Good quality down will tend to stay better than synthetics, but just know this jacket is old. This jacket is somewhere to the tune of like 12 years old. So it's lost some of its loft over the years, but it's still a good jacket. The other thing I'll do a lot of times is loosen these cuffs just to make sure I can pack my other layers in. That's why you see a lot of these jackets have adjustable cuffs, because it's going to allow you to kind of pack layers underneath it. That's why it's also important to try these down jackets on, because there's what you're gonna fit normally and then what you're gonna fit with a bunch of layers underneath. So next I'll put on my kind of powder girdle, I think it's called. I forget what the name is. Snow skirt? I don't know. But I'm gonna put this on so it's gonna keep the jacket tight to me. So now I've got the wool on my core, keeping me warm, keeping me dry. I've also got fleece kind of insulating me further. And then on the outside, I've got high loft. Quickly, my body core is going to heat the layers inside, and they're going to basically reflect that heat back to me, and it takes time. You're not instantly going to be warm with a jacket, so that's why sometimes you'll kind of put your layers on in the lodge a few minutes before you're going to go out, and then go out. Sometimes people make that mistake. Why isn't my jacket warm? The jacket's job is to insulate you and reflect your heat back to you. It's not, you know, a magic warm thing. That's why a lot of the ski gear you see has these little thumb things. It's not just for show or for race suits, although it does help with those. But it's basically allowing you to, when you've got a lot of layers, one, pull that layer all the way to where you want it. But additionally, it just adds as extra protection because you really don't want snow getting inside of here. It's gonna keep your wrists cold and eventually get your hands cold. If I wanna be warm too and I don't have a hat or a helmet, you know, I'll put the hood over. This just helps. Keep my face warm. Again, like I said, keep your core warm, appendages warm, and keep yourself dry. The next thing I'll do, I've got my leather mittens. I think it's like kind of a known fact at this point. Mittens are warmer because they keep your fingers all in one area. Your thumb will usually be the first thing that gets cold, but with gloves you have your fingers individual and they tend to get colder, whereas you can kind of have just your mitten all in one place. You can put hand warmers in if you want. Typically when I see people using a lot of hand warmers, it just indicates to me that when their core isn't warm enough and their mittens probably aren't warm enough. I don't have anything against hand warmers. I just think that if you find yourself using them like more than 20 or 30 days a year, probably just need to look at different mittens or better base layers. Leather is really important. Again, make sure none of this is cotton. The less fabric you can have, the better, because as soon as that fabric gets wet, you're gonna just be draining heat from your hands. The other thing I really prioritize is good ski socks. You know, just go get yourself a nice pair of Smart Wool. Smart Wool makes really good stuff. Darn Tough, I've heard, makes really good stuff as well, but just make sure it's wool. Sometimes it's a poly blend and it doesn't do the same thing. You want warm wool socks. It's hard because you don't want them too thick for your ski boot, depending on how that fits, but I've found that typically like the medium thickness works great. Figure out what works for you, but get yourself good ski socks. I know it stinks to buy more expensive ski socks. You can try to buy them in the summer, but this is a game changer for your feet. Now, let me show you what I would be wearing if it was kind of a wetter day. Because when down gets wet, it gets padded and it takes a really long time to dry. So you gotta kind of adjust your strategy. One thing you can do, and if you're really cold, like this is a good option, you can keep your down jacket on and then you can put a layer over it. Like, and this is part of why you have to be careful with sizing your jackets, but you can put a shell layer over the down so that you're still getting that loft and that warmth, and then you just get a shell over the top to keep the moisture out. Again, I'm aware this looks ridiculous, but you want to stay warm, right? When it gets that cold, looks go completely out the window. That's the other nice thing about snowboard jackets. They tend to have a little bit more room for packing layers underneath. See if this will even fit. I did not buy these jackets together planning to do this. And this is why on some of those 3-in-1 sets for jackets or 2-in-1 sets, they'll have like a small down layer and then it buttons straight into the jacket. Those are nice, and that's why they do that, because combining down with a shell is a great tactic for staying warm. I feel like that kid from A Christmas Story. Ralphie, wait for me. Keep the hood up. This is why it's pretty popular to see down jackets without hoods, but I don't know, I like the ski one specifically. The one thing you have to be careful with this is making sure at least part of this is covering your face. It's not fashionable, but oh my God, is it warm. My body temperature is heating this thing up like crazy. I mean, you want the shell to be ideally big enough that the jacket inside of it can still have loft. What's interesting is the coldest I've ever been, honestly, has been while ski coaching, because you're just standing on the side of the hill. At least when you're an athlete, you're moving. So like, it stinks having to wear the GS suits, but at least those GS suits, one, are warm, and two, you're moving. The movement to your body is important to staying warm. So, you know, if you are really cold, keep your body moving, keep that core temperature up. So now, not only do I have my base layers keeping me dry, wicking moisture off of my skin, I also have a fleece keeping my core warm. I have a down jacket that is lofted and building heat over time. And then I have a shell over the top, not only keeping that heat and reflecting it back, but also keeping moisture and wind off of my body. This is a very warm setup. It doesn't look stylish. I know I look ridiculous. I can barely put my arms down, but I am warm. If you're finding yourself needing to be warm, follow these tips. Again, let's repeat. Stay away from cotton, keep your core body temperature warm, keep your fingers and toes warm and dry, and keep moisture out. More layers isn't always better. Sometimes you need the right temperature so you don't start sweating, so that that sweat doesn't freeze and then you're back in a worse spot than you started. So, those are my tips to staying warm. When it comes to skiing, also, make sure that your goggles don't have a gap to keep that wind off of your face. I've had jackets that basically just stayed in my backpack all year long, or at least on the cold days, and I did that in case it got cold. Pack an old down jacket or whatever you need, but pack an extra jacket, because you never know when the conditions are gonna change. And there's nothing worse than missing out on a powder day because you weren't prepared. So for anyone skiing or not skiing, this is how you stay warm, from someone who grew up in Vermont where it's cold. Where I grew up in Vermont, in northern Vermont, it would sometimes get -40 plus wind chill on top of that. I would have times where I had to walk the dog and I'd have a big setup like this. Staying warm is no joke. I've seen people get frostbite and had scars later. Seriously, the cold is nothing to mess with. Anyway, I know this is a very different kind of video, but I hope you found it helpful. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you like this kind of content, please feel free to like and subscribe. It helps my channel out a lot. Thank you for watching, I appreciate it. And as always, I'll see you in the next one. See ya. Oh God, gotta get this stuff off now. Ugh.